Hi, everybody, and welcome to this next edition of the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast, where we explore healthy masculinity from many, many perspectives. Today, I'm really excited because I've got my friend Rod Butterss coming on to talk. And Rod is a fascinating guy. The first time I met him, I didn't really know him, but it was back in the mid-1980s. He was a sprinter, professional sprinter. And he and his teammates used to train on the speedballs at Richmond Hill Clinic. And at the time, I was the resident physiologist. And a few afternoons a week at about 4 o'clock, I was driven out of my office by this horrendous sound of about 8 speedballs going non-stop. It was just almost give a bloke a headache. Anyway, that was fine. But here we are today. Rod's done many, many things. He's built huge businesses. He's and built them and sold them. He's lost money. He's from 2007, he was the president of the St Kilda Football Club in the AFL. So he's done a lot. He's still out there creating them. And during COVID, we spent a lot of time walking and talking. I just loved our conversations. So Rod Butterss, welcome to the Good Bloke Not Woke podcast.
Thank you, John. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. Pardon me. I listened to your podcast yesterday, and it really resonated. And so I was prompted to give you a call and say thank you, and then bombard you with some of my poetry, of course. But it's a wonderful pleasure to be here with you again. Thank you.
Yeah, good stuff, mate. We don't catch up enough, and we must change that, because I always did enjoy those walks. So, mate, you've had a colourful career.
Yeah.
You've been to the top of the pops, and you found your way to the gutter as well.
Yeah.
And so there's so many areas that we can talk about. And one of the ones I'd really love to start off with is footy clubs, because as you know, I worked in footy clubs in high performance roles. My first gig was as a fitness advisor at St Kilda Footy Club back in 1982. And I was a bit shocked then by how it ran. And my last gig was a Richmond Footy Club in 1999. And I look at that, and I look at the things that went on inside footy clubs, and some great things. And I've got a lot of really good friends who are in footy who tell me some great stories of the clubs they were in. And I also was a bit of a student of all codes of football. And one of the things I learned in my readings was that the man who actually first invented rugby union was a sports master at a private boys' school called Rugby in England, and he was a former military man. And he had this belief that military service was a wonderful tool for shaping boys and turning them into good, responsible men.
Yep.
And at the time, there wasn't much happening military-wise. So he invented a game that was like a running battlefield. So it was skirmishes, stealing territory, defending territory. And if you watch rugby union without understanding the rules, that's exactly what it is.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
how interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he believed that through participation in that game, he could teach boys qualities of character, courage, sportsmanship, cooperation, humility, how to be good winners, good losers. And to this day, when you watch rugby union, the players refer to the referees as Mr.
Oh.
Mr. Stewart, Mr. Johnson, whatever the case may be.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And you see, somehow that didn't carry down into other codes of footy. And we notice in recent years the teams that have really come up and have performed really well, like the resurgence of Richmond, it was because Peggy O'Neill and Brendan Gale instituted a program to develop all the people in the club to help them to show up and become better human beings.
Indeed, they did.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
no
I'm just
accident.
interested in your observation, because being a president of a footy club, and St Kilda Footy Club notoriously they've struggled with culture. What was it like?
Oh, that's a really, how long have we got?
As long as you want, mate.
It's a really interesting question. I once asked Alan Jeans, who was an incredible human being, a wonderful person in my eyes, and many, many others.
Yeah.
He coached the Saints to 1 premiership, and he coached Hawthorn to 3.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of sitting down with him on multiple occasions, but on this one occasion, I said, "Yabby, mate, you've coached us to 1, and you've coached Hawthorn to 3. Hawthorn have won 10 or 11 or 12 in the last 20, 30 years. We've won 1, and we fell over the line. What's the difference between the two clubs?" And I sat on the edge of my chair, and Yabby, you remember Yabby, he went, "Well, laddie, he said, well, there's not a lot of difference, laddie, not a lot." I said, "Oh, come on, Alan, you've won 12, we've won 1. He said, "I can't tell you that I noticed a great deal of difference, laddie." But the point he made, very good point he made, he said, St Kilda have sold more players that have gone on to win premierships elsewhere than any other club. And I think also we were for a long time a victim of our own poor financial management. Right. And in the AFL system, if you're not successful financially and on field, then there's a pecking order. And I quickly identified that within the AFL community, we were the 6-stone weakling sitting on the sand. The other clubs would kick sand in our face. We had zero respect.
Yeah, wow.
And I remember after we sacked Malcolm Blight, and I was only a 40-year-old punk president at the time, and I got a call from the great Ron Evans, the chairman of the AFL. He said, "How you feeling, son?" I said, "Oh, not too good, Mr. Evans. They're coming at me left, right, and centre, the bloody media, the members." And he said, "Well, don't ever forget one thing. You have just made a very powerful statement in the industry. Don't stuff around with us." He might have used the F word.
Yeah,
and
right.
Reflecting back, I think that there's, often answers to questions like that aren't singular. There's a few moving parts. And the other thing Ron Evans did was a wonderful investigation into history of successful AFL clubs. Now, we all know that Collingwood's greatest benefactor was John Wren, the two-up school dodgy. And 27, 28, 29 and 30, 4 premierships in a row. He bought them. And good on him. Footscray or the Doggies and North Melbourne were factory areas, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Where did the factory people work? Where did the factory workers work? They worked there, but they lived in Collingwood and Richmond.
Yeah.
Where did the factory managers work? Live? They lived in Essendon.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of a, and then it got to the Saints, and we were a bunch of thespians, a bunch of, ratbag artists and poets.
Yeah.
and then, there was a bit of bad luck too. I mean, in the mid-late 70s or early 70s, I think we were about to pick up the Peninsula as our recruitment zone. And Hawthorn somehow did a deal with the AFL. It was a bit grubby back then. And we ended up with Bendigo or Ballarat. Now, we've got some good players, but we didn't get the likes of Tuck and Matthews and Martello and all the wonderful. So there's a bit of luck, there's a bit of circumstance, and history's history, and that's all fine. But what we tried to do was to be strong and bold, and there was a little bit of that. Don't you worry. We wanted to stick it up the other clubs, because they had no respect for us.
Yeah.
And we were sick of it.
So interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about the club being financial struggle, probably the go-to place for nighttime entertainment for years around Melbourne was the St Kilda Social Club.
Oh, we were good at it.
And I imagine there would have been a ton of money poured through there. I mean, what happened? Why do you reckon there was mismanagement? Because it's like at some point, whether it be a household or a business or whatever, somebody has to stand up and take responsibility for the money,
Yeah, and I think, again, it gets back to fundamentals. Because we were broke, we probably couldn't employ the sharpest people in the industry. And because we were broke, we struggled with facilities, and we struggled with, it's a bit of a flow-on effect.
Yeah.
And having said that, that does not mean you cannot be successful.
No.
It just means you've got to recognise your landscape. And I was very blessed. I can tell you right now, I was the least intelligent person in my boardroom. Thank God.
Yeah.
We brought some extremely competent, capable people in. And I don't know if you remember, but we built a list that was the envy of the AFL.
We
Real.
had Jim Watts there too, didn't you, at the time?
Jimmy was our chief executive for a while, and Brian Waldron, who I have enormous respect for, was our chief executive after Jim. Then Jim came back for another stint. But in the boardroom, we had some seriously competent people. I often reflect that our boardroom meetings were more like little MBA classes, you know.
Yeah, right.
We didn't talk footy. We
Yeah.
very rarely talked footy. We talked strategy. We talked culture. We talked leadership. We talked personal responsibility. We talked everything but where's Fred going to play, you know. And we thank God for Brian's what I call Brian Waldron football IQ, FIQ.
Yeah.
He was in the 99 percentile, and he traded for Rewalt, Kaczynski, Ball, Clark, Del Santo, Fraser Garrick, Aaron Hamill, Stevie Powell, Luke Penny. I mean, for God's sake, Stevie Milne. And we went from being in the gutter on the bottom in 2000 to playing off in the 2004 prelim, which we should have won. That's another story.
Yeah.
So you can do it, but you've got to
Yeah.
be single-minded. And I think for me, it was recognizing that if I recognized pretty quickly that if I was the smartest person in the boardroom, we're in deep shit. So I went and got
So
the mic.
do you think a big part of that turnaround of the club then was really at the pointy end, the leadership, the
Oh, yeah.
board having that cooperation and that
Oh,
I
yeah.
suppose
It was a
alignment
team.
on the board?
It was a
It's
team.
very interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
And nothing's perfect. There's always going to be issues, and life and humanness get in the way.
Yeah.
You know, we're not idealistic, you know, enough to think that it's all going to be wonderful. We had our challenges, but we had enough strong people, you know, who were there for the right reasons to help us build a strategy and use a lot of data to help us
Yeah.
So leave your opinion to the side. Leave your opinion outside. What is the data telling us about where we're at, how we're going? And when Brian Waldron came to me in 2000, late 2000, he said, Rod, we're going to trade out Peter Everett, Barry Hall, Darryl and Shane Wakelin for very, very good players. I can tell you now, mate, I nearly shat myself.
Yeah.
But then he explained why. He said, our list is not good enough to play off in a grand final. So why are we carrying these four, you know, champion players, very, very good players, if we're not going to win a grand final? Our purpose is to win a grand final.
Yeah.
So we traded them out. We got the picks, and we went. You know, history will tell you. And we played off in 3, and you know that big fella up there. He's got to answer to some of that.
Gotcha. It's amazing, isn't it? Like there's a little story about when you guys were doing that recruiting because I moved down from Queensland when I was a 10-year-old, and we lived in Collingwood, and
Okay.
I chose to follow Fitzroy. But I finished my primary school off at the convent down in Abbotsford.
Oh yeah, I know it well.
And it was a family there of Hunts. There was, I think, 3 boys and 3 girls in the family, and the boys were amazing footballers. They were just really good footballers, and we all just loved playing footy with them. And the girls were pretty good on the netball and all that sort of stuff. They were just, the family was full of athletes, you know.
Yes.
But the boys didn't really go on. They ended up playing their footy at Collingwood districts and that sort of stuff. So they didn't really do much. The oldest boy, Bernie, I played with him for a season in the under-19s at Collingwood. I was 15 when I played in the under-19s at Collingwood. And anyway, when Nick Del Santo started running around the park, I saw him on TV and I thought, well, the kid looks like Jimmy Hunt. You know, it's like, it was almost like a carbon copy. And I rang an old mate of mine from Collingwood and I said, have a look at that kid Del Santo at St Kilda. Tell me who he reminds you of.
Yes.
And he rang me up about 2 weeks later and he said, he looks like Jimmy Hunt. I said, that's what I thought, you know. Anyway, I found out about 3 years later that Del Santo's mum was Eileen Hunt.
Oh my God.
The older sister, right?
Oh my God. And a beautiful family.
But the story has another punchline to it because the youngest sister in the family, her name's Bontempelli.
Oh my God.
Those 2 boys are cousins, you know?
My God.
Isn't that amazing? You know?
That is quite mind-blowing.
Yeah.
There's a lot in the genes, you know, mate.
Like the jeans, yep. It was the girls, not the boys. But
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
I
yeah.
think the boys lacked the opportunity, but and they weren't very tall either. But so
Talking of girls, can I just make one point?
mhm,
Women in football, not women in football, but I asked Johnny Beveridge was our senior recruiting manager for 20 odd years at the club.
mhm,
And I remember saying to him once, Johnny, how do you make a decision between two players who have got exactly the same skill, height, capability, and aptitude? How do you separate them?
yeah,
He said, oh, that's easy, Rod. I go and have coffee with their mothers, and I take the one with the smartest and most balanced mother.
yeah.
Fact. Blew me away.
Well, I've got another little story about that for you too. So there's a young bloke playing at St Kilda right now. He's a backup ruckman. He's been in the system. I think he's in his 12th year in the system, and he's played 58 senior games.
My God.
Holds a record.
My
He
God.
did his first 7 years at the Bulldogs. He did a couple of years at North, and now he's at the Saints, right? And he was telling me a couple of weeks ago that this might be his last season. And he's my nephew.
Oh,
And when when he was a kid, when I was at Richmond in 1999, one of the culture flaws at Richmond at the time was that the same kid every week got to be the team mascot. He was one of the director's sons.
oh,
We were going over to play Port Adelaide in Adelaide, and I was thinking about taking my son, who was 9 years old, on the trip. My brother-in-law, Mark Campbell, contacted me and said, I'm thinking of going over for the weekend to take Tom with me. And Tom was 7. And he said, just to have a boys' weekend because they're mad Richmond supporters.
right, right.
And so I said, well, if you do that, I'll take Shane, and can Shane sit with you during the game? And he said, yep, no worries at all. Let's do that. So we organised it. I then went into the football manager at the footy club because I just had an idea. And I said, have we got a mascot this week? And he said, no, we haven't. The young fellow who normally does it isn't going to the game this week. And I said, oh, do we want a mascot? He said, what do you got in mind? And I said, well, my young nephew's coming to the game. He's a real Tigers fan. He said, yeah, no worries at all. He can be the
Oh,
mascot. So I rang Mark and I said, do you think Tom would like to be the mascot? And Mark went, oh my God, yeah. And I said, well, he's got to have his Richmond strip on, put a tracksuit on him, bring him down to the rooms before the game. So I brought him down, and Tom was a tiny little boy. He was a really fragile little boy, and he had really spiky hair, and he's very shy. So he came into the rooms, and Mark brought him in, and the players were all warming up. And anyway, we got him to strip off his tracksuit pants, and he's standing there in his Richmond gear. And Brendan McCartney, who was reserves coach at the time, came over, knelt down on the floor in front of him, and said, "G'day, mate. What's your name?"
yeah.
He said, "Tom." He said, "Good on you, Tom." He goes, "Tuck your jumper in, mate. You got to look like a footballer," ruffle his head and told him to enjoy his time.
Yeah,
And he
yeah.
got up and walked away. So then, as the players are coming out, I used to always run out ahead of them and get the other side of the banner so I could meet them as they came through and continue the warm up, right?
Yes, yes.
So I'm on the other side of the banner, and all I hear, so I could see the players' feet under the banner, is Matty Knights, who's the team captain, say, "Come on, Tom." And they come through the banner, and Tommy's running around the ground, completely lost, like this. That's how he's
Yeah,
running around, like this,
yeah.
and his eyes are wide. And Mark slipped $50 to one of the cameramen on the side to take a hold of photos, and so that was really cool. So
Wow.
anyway, that was all great, and the footy game was amazing, and we got over the line by a point.
Oh, wow.
Really amazing game, amazing night. Go back, I think 2012, I can't remember what year it was. Tom gets drafted by the Bulldogs, and
Oh,
Brendan
wow.
McCartney's the senior coach.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So I rang Macca, and we had a good catch-up chat, hadn't seen each other for years. He's a brilliant fella, Brendan McCartney. And I said, do you remember that night in 1999 we went over to play Port Adelaide? And he said, oh, how could you ever forget that game? He goes, that was an amazing night. 1 point. I said, yeah. I said, do you remember my little nephew was the team mascot? And he goes, yeah.
Yeah,
Wee little fellow with spiky hair. I remember him.
yeah.
I said,
Good.
you're kidding. You do? And he goes, yeah, I do. I said, wow. Well, you just drafted him. And he goes, what? Who? And I said, Tom Campbell. And he said, what the fuck happened? He's
Fantastic.
fine. Because Tommy's like 6'7", 6'8", and a beast of a human being. And Macca said to me, I can't believe that. It's amazing.
That is an amazing story.
And he said, but I'm going to tell you something, Johnny. I'm going to tell you why I drafted him. And I said, why is that, mate? He said, because he's a decent human being.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
get it.
I was able to send a text to Tom's dad and tell him that. And it sort of closed a loop that had been running for 12, 13, 14, 15 years. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I think one of the interesting things about sport, and certainly elite sport, in terms of my involvement, is that you do need a lot of very decent human beings.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want a list of altar boys.
No.
So you've got to, find the balance, and you've also got to look to people like Lenny Hayes.
Yeah.
Now, Lenny Hayes was just a beautiful human being, a tough, hard footballer,
Yeah.
and a wonderful natural leader.
Yeah.
So you've got to get that balance right, because you can have your rat bags. There's been plenty of rat bags, but you need the good, strong leaders to have an overlay so that they can teach and show the rat bag a better way. And whilst I wouldn't call Dusty a rat bag, he's more of an introvert. And he's a friend of mine because he was my neighbour down the road in Elwood. Beautiful soul, but he had Trent Cotchin, for example. Yeah. He had Trent Cotchin. And when I was at the Saints, I had George Young.
Yeah.
And to a lesser extent, Russell Green. But, once we leave the family home and we move over to the footy club, we need direction, and we need, that's leadership, and we need those few leaders. And we've all heard of stories about, different clubs and how certain individuals have sort of taken the bull by the horns from the leadership perspective and raised the bar. I remember a story in our place when Aaron Hamill had been with us for only a couple of weeks in pre-season, and off his own bat, he called the players into the players' lounge and he gave them a good dressing down.
Yeah, really.
He said, fellas, if you want to win a premiership and that's why you're here, let me tell you, because I've just come from winning a premiership a couple of years back, your standard's about there, you've got to get it to there.
Yeah.
And that, Aaron was a natural leader as well, and you need him. And you need them across the organisation.
Yeah.
And you need them to understand where not to stick their nose as well.
Yeah. 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 It's so interesting, and it's like, Paul Roos is a good friend of mine, and he was telling me that, he still looks back on his first season at Fitzroy.
Mm-hmm.
He and Gary Pert were just young kids.
Yes.
When they come into the system, and he said the older blokes around the club were unbelievable. And he said that, they went on an end of season trip.
Yep. As you know.
Each night they were away on the trip. Michael Conlon and Laurie Serafini didn't go to bed till they knew that Purdy and I were in bed.
There you go.
Yeah. They just took care of us. They made sure we behaved, and they taught us a lot. And, I'm catching up with Mickey for breakfast this week, and, he's just gone into retirement. I might even get him on the podcast because he's a amazing man, Mickey Conlon, who was a plasterer when he started out at Fitzroy and went on to become country CEO for Reebok in Australia, South Korea, and South Africa.
Wonderful story.
But that's what happens. He was a decent human being all the way through, and that had a ripple effect. And I think that goes back to the stuff I was saying before, and with Aaron Hamill, what you're saying before about this whole thing of guys stepping into leadership and trying to drag the other blokes up to their level.
That's it.
Yeah.
Or coach or teach or drag, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
But set a bar and bring them along.
Yeah.
Because footy clubs, as you know as well as I do, John, they're difficult environments for a lot of personality types.
Yeah.
And and not only that, once you come into the club environment, you are exposed to a whole range of temptations.
Yeah.
Alcohol, drugs, women, money, prestige, fame, hanger-oners, whatever you call them. And so that period of adaptation from sort of 18 to 21, 22, 23 And
Yeah.
God knows I didn't mature till I was 50. That's a really important phase, because whilst you've got your strong leaders in the club, and every club's got them, you've got equally strong counter perspectives outside of the club, trying to get them into nightclubs, trying to get them into, so it's bloody hard for a kid who's 18, 19, 20, earning $300,000 or $400,000 a year to pass up some of those temptations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bloody hard.
Yeah. It's so
Where you get that balance of leadership. Just quickly, I had a senior player approach me once who was a very, 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 a very good player, and he said, "Rod, I think some of the boys are sharing marijuana, amongst the playing list." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" He was a senior player, and he said, "No, I'm telling you so that you can do something about it." And I said, "Listen, I wear a suit and tie, right? And they know me as president. I can walk down into the change rooms and I can have a conversation with them, but they've heard them all before, those conversations." I said, "But if you take them into the gym and have a quiet word, I'll sit up and take notice." He said, "That's not my job." I said, "Well, I've just given you authority to make it your job."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, what will I do? How will I go about it?" I said, "I don't give a shit. You can beat the shit out of them if you want. You can have stern talking. You can sack them if you want. You've got our authority to do, as a leader of this organization, what you think needs to be done." And he said, "I can't do it."
Wow.
He was a brilliant footballer. I'm not going to name him.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name, but it just stuck out to me that therein lies one of our problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
We couldn't delegate properly through the organization for people to take ownership and responsibility for their own environment. And that's why I love, the book, the rugby union book, Sweep the Sheds.
Yeah.
Sweep
the sheds. Well, it's so interesting. It's I think that as I was saying to you before the podcast, one of my definitions of healthy masculinity is to develop a really strong moral compass and then have the courage to live it by. Sounds like he had the moral compass, but he didn't have the courage to go with it.
Yeah, and yet on the field he did.
Yeah.
And that's where life's really interesting. There's no question of doubt on the field. He displayed every trait and talent that you would hope for.
Yeah.
But once we step off the field into life, we've got to have that same conviction.
Yeah.
That same, and that comes, I think, John, that comes from my family. That came from, now I was a slow learner, but I had a predisposition for, alcohol.
Yeah.
I couldn't handle it. And I didn't know I couldn't handle it. I thought it was normal.
Yeah.
Until I had enough and I got educated that you've got a disease or a predisposition. And when you take a drink, this is what happens. So you better own it and do something about it. It took me a long time, but I finally got there. So, I think family is such a critical component of, I think I get the sense anyway that too many people outsource the raising of their children to their school.
Yeah.
No, it's about mum and dad and brothers and sisters. I was lucky, mate. I had 10 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And I came sixth. So I had 4 older sisters. So I had 4 mothers and a mother.
Yeah, wow.
And don't worry, they would kick my backside if I,
So you were one of 11 kids, were you?
10, yeah. Yeah.
I was one of 9.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
But I'm a bit different to you because I was the tallest, smartest, and best looking.
I was the dumbest and most stupid. And
it's not true.
My mother used to say to me, though, "You be very careful, son. Charm is a form of genius. You be very careful."
Oh, it's so interesting, isn't it? It
is.
Yeah, I think that I look at, where, golly, that courage thing, it's really significant because if we look back a few years when Australian cricket had that terrible time in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I reckon it's just my viewpoint, and it's just a viewpoint, right? But I reckon, oh God, a bird just slammed into the window. Right,
oh no!
It gave me a bit of a fright. I reckon that the problem started there in the test before.
Yeah,
Remember
probably.
when Dave Warner had that punch on in the stairwell?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because they were sledging each other, and the sledging got really intense. It
Yes,
ended up being a punch on in the stairwell.
that's right.
I reckon at that moment, Cricket Australia should have said, David, that's not on, mate. Come
Yeah,
home. You're
yeah.
coming home. Yeah.
Deal with it.
Just you got to handle your temper, and
Yes,
you handle the fact that these guys are going to get under your skin, and you've embarrassed yourself and the country by getting caught on film doing that. If they had brought him home, the rest of it would never have happened
mm,
because
mm,
he apparently was the architect of the sandpaper.
right.
And it
Yeah,
was so interesting because I actually met the cameraman that filmed it.
right.
And he said, we would never have known if the young kid with the sandpaper didn't have a panic attack because we'd lost interest in him. We didn't think there was anything afoot. But the director switched to another camera. He said, but my camera was still pointing at him. And he nervously pulled something out of his pocket and shoved it
Yes,
down his pants.
yes.
And that was enough. But there was a lack of a decision there by the officials, the Australian cricket officials, to say,
Mm,
we're going to
yeah,
draw a line there,
yeah.
as tough as it would have been on Davey Warner, it would have raised the bar for the
Yeah,
cricket. And then we come to the Olympics, and then we saw what happened in the boxing. Now, I know there's a lot of emotive opinions around here, but I don't care. I'm going to stand up and say I've read a lot of stuff, and the International Boxing Federation said, no, you can't compete. You're male.
yeah,
Okay. Then there's been a whole lot of stuff on the web about the person's chromosomes, all that
yeah,
sort of stuff.
yeah.
But if you look close, I saw some close-up video of that boxer jumping up and down with joy after winning, and there is an appendage inside the shorts bouncing up and down, right?
I think we call them gonads.
Yeah. Well, it was a penis, right? And so I look at that and I think, what's happened to the global administrators of sport, the Olympic Games, which, Dan Andrews completely profaned Commonwealth Games,
Yeah,
and now the Olympic Games, which we hold as so sacred, and we consecrate it every year by giving it our attention and just loving all the competition. And we watch sports that we would never normally watch
yeah. Indeed, that's the
because it's the
second thing.
Olympics, right?
Yeah,
But then they profane it because they haven't got the courage to stand up to the agitators and the minority groups who want to push some sort of agenda. And I just
agenda.
think, you know, I mean, what's happening? How do we change that, Rod, so that we can get the leadership of our organisations to do the right thing?
Well, I think it's a really fascinating topic, particularly when you look at where the globe's going right now, across technology, across minority groups, across politics, and the geopolitical situation, trade, China, Russia, North Korea, and the unfortunate situation the Americans seem to find themselves in has been quite divided. And it all gets back to leadership. But leadership in my lifetime seems to have changed quite a bit. I hark back to the leaders I grew up with, and I'm talking the Paul Keatings and the John Howards and and even a couple before that, and the JF Kennedys and Margaret Thatcher, and some strong leaders. And what I see in global political leadership, particularly now, is it's a popularity contest. Who can abuse each other? And our local leadership, you mentioned his name before. He makes my stomach churn. Our former premier. I can't even say his name. Horrible, horrible self-interest. You look at something like the voice to Parliament. A couple of years ago was handled abominably.
Mm-hmm.
No concepts. It was he turned it into a popularity contest.
Yeah, yeah,
Rather than what's the root cause here? What is
yeah.
the real problem we're trying to fix? Because one thing I know for sure, if you try and fix the wrong problem, the real problem will stay evident.
Yes,
And I see it, quite frankly, on both sides or all sides of politics. And I'm really concerned that we just don't have that vision and backbone that we were privileged to enjoy and experience as youngsters, John.
I think there's a thing that I once heard. I think Joe Rogan actually quoted it. It was something that Mark Twain said,
Oh, yes.
We could never find out whether Mark Twain wrote it or whether he was quoting somebody else. But it was simply said, hard times create hard men. Hard men create soft times. Soft times create soft men. And soft men create hard times.
Cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, I do believe that we've got this, you look around the world at the moment and you ask yourself, where are the leaders that have really, really strong, just have got just they've got stainless steel backbones, I think I'm pretty interested in Javier Milei in Argentina. I mean, man, he came out of nowhere, and the first thing he's doing is drastically reducing the size of government,
Right.
drastically reducing, and he's changing everything. The Prime Minister of Hungary, he came into power and he just said, this country needs population. So then what he's done is he said to women, you have a child, you take 25% off your tax. If you
Wow.
have 2 children, 50% off. Three
Wow.
children, 75% off. You have 4 children, 100% off your tax. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, baby boom,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're growing the country. And it's like, strong decisions, and I think that America's lacked a strong leader for a long time, and
Yeah.
I really and really that there's unelected people running the country, like there's so much money going into the military, and you hear horror stories, listening to a lot of podcast interviews with senators who are inside the system and
Yeah.
telling you how it runs, like it's amazing.
And I think
But
also what I've witnessed is the emergence of the lobby groups,
mm,
be it guns, be it gambling, be it what, there's always a lobby group, and
yeah,
they got the fistful of dollars,
yeah,
and they can buy their way, they can buy influence.
yeah,
I've just written an article on gambling companies and the extent that they will go to, the grubby, filthy extent that they will go to prey on problem gamblers. Makes
yeah,
me want to puke.
yeah,
And both sides of Parliament are benefiting from their, as are the media companies, as are the AFL. And I did a piece with Caroline Wilson a number of years ago that the AFL have completely failed us on gaming.
yeah.
They completely failed us. They're teaching our 7-year-old kids how to become gambling addicts,
Yeah.
all for the sake of a few extra dollars. I mean,
Well, it's so interesting because there's a real problem now with 14-year-old girls becoming addicted to gambling on their mobile phones.
oh,
And the
mate,
question I ask is, how in hell do they even get to open up an account on an app? How does that
oh,
work?
well, there's no real vetting or checking. The gambling companies have way too much influence. And
Mm,
don't worry, these gambling companies, their devices are not by accident.
no.
You start playing with those devices and the old brain's emitting dopamine. And, I just wrote an
Yeah,
article.
I've never seen. I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but back in 2019, my partner's son came home from school one day. He was in year 11 at an elite Melbourne school.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "How's your day, mate?" And he said, "Oh, brilliant. Had a really good day." And I said, "What made it so good?" And he said, "Oh, as a kid in year 12, he's got a part-time job with Ladbrokes. And he's taught us how to download the app, and he showed us how to set it all up. And he's helped us because if we put $100 credit in there, Ladbrokes will match it with another 200 credit."
Should be a crime.
Huh? And
It
I
should
went,
be a crime.
and do you know what I said?
What did you say?
"That's amazing, mate. Show me how that works. I'm really interested." Instead of butting it back and
Yeah,
making
yeah,
him
yeah, yeah.
done something wrong, I opened up a space for him to share it all with me. And I said to him, have you shown your dad this? He'll love this. And he said, "No, I haven't. Do you reckon I should?" And I said, "Oh, mate, your dad, he'll love this." Anyway, I reckon 2 or 3 weeks passed by and I hadn't heard anything and I couldn't sit on it any longer. So I contacted the principal at the school and said, "Mate, you got a problem.
Yeah,
And if you don't fix it, it could destroy your brand overnight."
yeah,
And he was
yeah.
really grateful and he sorted it out. But as I've said in my talks a lot of the time, you can bet your bottom dollar that Ladbrokes didn't have a kid at Sunshine High School.
No way.
They're going after where the money is, and
They know where the dough is. They're not dumb.
yeah,
How do you tell the difference between a drug dealer and a gambling executive? One has a leather jacket and rides a motorcycle. The other has an Armani and drives a Ferrari.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
and they're both mongrels.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
I've
Well, yeah.
heard stories about gamblers who have been so addicted. One AFL player told me, he said, "Rod, you're lucky. You're just a garden variety alcoholic. I'm a gambling addict." He
Yeah.
would sit in the TAB chair and shat himself. He would physically soil himself rather than get up and leave.
Yeah. Wow.
And anyway, it's just something. I've been in touch with Tim Costello. It's something I'm hearing more and more about, their grubby little tactics. And I've got to tell you,
Apparently there's a push at the moment. I just heard yesterday, I think, that they're talking about banning all advertising of gambling.
oh, they're talking about it, but they're not going to do it. It's come out later in the week that Albanese shat himself and he's gone soft on it, and it ain't going to happen. The
Yeah.
lobby's too great, and our leaders are too gutless. And as you said yesterday, I've got to be careful because I'm not prepared to run for parliament myself.
No, yeah, exactly. It is interesting, but it's like these are the things that are really sort of affecting the young people growing up. And
Yeah.
I'm really passionate about how do I take the young blokes? Like you would love this. I was the after lunch speaker at a Chuka Footy Club a couple of weeks ago. My partner and I went up there. We were treated really lovely, really, really good people. And I got up and spoke, and it was really wonderful, and we had a great interaction. And their coach there is Andrew Walker, who played at Carlton.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, took that gigantic mark because he's an
yeah,
Echuca boy, and his dad's a bit of an Echuca legend. And he took over as senior coach. And when he arrived there, and it was just really interesting because less than a week later, I was on a Zoom with Anthony Rock because Anthony's managing a company that's owned by Andrew Walker and Luke Hodge, and they're in the manpower game for construction and mining, etc. And
oh yeah, oh yeah,
they'll and Anthony was looking for some connections and contacts, and he said, and it was really lovely talking to him. And he was a tough little nugget when he played his footy. What he did when he arrived at that footy club, the first thing he said was, right, we're going to stop looking outside the zone to recruit. We're going to find the players in this town because there's players in this town, right? So that's the first thing he did. He started to draw more people into the footy club and welcome more people into the footy club. Then one of his rules is that every senior player has to have a coaching role in one of the junior teams.
wow,
Yeah. That club is so successful. They've won several premierships. They're always up in the top of the ladder. Like the whole club is just thriving and doing incredibly because the players aren't walking around being superstars. They're putting an effort into building the club. And it's so important because now myself and some friends are trying to rebuild Marcellin Old Boys Footy Club where I played my footy
yeah,
because they're in the doldrums, because they're not getting feed from the school anymore, because there's too much money in suburban footy. And all the good
yes,
footballers are going to play suburban footy. So we've
yeah,
got to work on doing it a different way. And I was speaking to the guys about it, and they said, this is our plan. And I couldn't believe it. They said, we're going to get the senior players to participate in coaching in the junior teams. And we're inviting all the schoolboys to come and join the old boys for pre-season.
fantastic.
It's like,
It's often not, rocket science, John, is it?
yeah, yeah,
It's basics and
yeah,
simple things. And I love the saying that talent borrows, but genius steals. So you don't have to come up with a new fandangled unique approach. There's
yeah,
plenty of examples in our life of wonderful leadership and examples like Andrew Walker that you can pick up that concept and drop it in. And as long
yeah,
as you implement it reasonably well, you'll experience some of the benefits or the benefits.
yeah.
So
Well, it's interesting, mate. It's like every now and then you meet people who are incredible role models. You talk about Yabby Jeans, and I know Yabby was incredible. He was a
oh,
policeman, and he was just very strong, and he had a very strong moral compass, and he didn't budge. He was unwavering on
yeah,
that. And the players knew. So there's very safe boundaries. They knew what the standards were, and David Parkham was the same.
yes,
And
yeah,
David was also a phys ed. And, I think I've told the story on the podcast before when I was watching my daughter play footy down at Red Hill. They played in the Lightning Premiership. And I stood there on the sideline as I watched her kick 20 goals in 80 minutes of footy, right?
you're kidding me.
Oh, she went nuts. I couldn't believe it. And these young girls were going harder than the young boys. They're all 11, 12-year-olds, and at the time there was a push for all the footy clubs on the peninsula to start netball teams to get more women involved. And I thought that was so patriarchal and arrogant, because the women already had their netball clubs. But while I was watching that game, I realised that this is the future of suburban footy, women's footy,
Oh, yeah.
So I rang David Parkin and told him, I was standing there on the sideline, and I just rang him and I said, David, you got to shut up and listen to me because I want to tell you something. And I gave him the whole story, and you know what? He got it. He went, okay. And that's why we've got women's footy right now, because David Parkin grabbed it with both hands and said, right, we're not putting this one down. That's what he said to me. We're not putting this one down,
Yeah.
And it was so, so that strong leadership is just, and then passing that on to the young men and the young women that
So important.
come in touch. I just feel that, I don't know what you reckon, Rod, but I reckon footy clubs and, and sport, and whether it be in community settings or in school, I reckon that's the pathway, and Paul Roos is putting effort into that space, and so is his son Dylan, and there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good work in that space. Razor Ray Chamberlain,
Yes.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. You mentioned Alan Jeans, you mentioned David Parkin, and I'll throw another one into the mix, Tommy Hafey.
Oh, Tommy.
And I had the wonderful opportunity to get to know each of those fellows, not David as well. But I remember when we sacked Tomo and we were looking for a senior coach, and David was walking out of the MCG one day, and I walked up to him and I said, David, Rod Butterss, we're looking for a senior coach. Any advice? And he leaned in and he looked at me. He was engaging with me.
Yeah.
And he said, Rod, if I were you, I'd try and find the next great coach.
Yeah, right.
But it was the manner in which he gave me 100%, and Tommy would give you 100%, and Yabby would. So I think communication is a couple of things about that. It's not necessarily what you say, but it's how you say it in terms of with integrity and powerful meaning, something meaningful. And I can't remember the second point. But they were great communicators. Is really the point.
Well, Tommy, as you know, I knew Tommy pretty well, and used to go and sit down with him and have a cup of tea. And I'd often see him out there in the mornings. We're out there running and stuff. And when he was really sick, I flew into Perth, and I heard on the radio as I got off the plane in Perth that Tommy had been put back into hospital.
Yeah, melanoma.
And so I rang the hospital just to check in to see how he was.
Yeah.
And the phone, clicked a few times, and Tommy picked the phone up.
Oh.
I said, Tommy, it's Johnny. And he goes, oh, g'day, mate. And he sounded really, really unwell. And I said, how you going, mate? He said, oh, it's like H division in here, which is his reference to maximum security at Pentry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I said, seriously, mate, what's going on? He said, I'm not too well, mate. He goes, and the really sad part about it, he said, there's really good people here looking after me, but they could be looking after other people.
Oh,
that
was Tommy.
Yeah?
I got to know Tommy like a blessing. I was dating Karen, his daughter.
Right.
When I was 15. So I'd lob around. I'm playing for the Saints under 19s, but I'm lobbing around to Tommy's place most nights.
Uh-huh.
And I dated her for not a long period of time, but Trevor Barker turned up and I got the lemonade and sauce very quickly. That's life. I was privileged to have spent time one-on-one with Tommy. I'll never get one night I was training with the under 19s at St Kilda at Moorabbin, and I just looked up into the grandstand and there was Tommy. He'd come out, he'd driven all the way across, well, not all the way across, but from Butterss to watch me and one other fella he knew train. Extraordinary human beings.
Yeah. Well, he after I got off that phone call, I just contemplated for a minute. I thought, the old bugger's going to leave.
Yeah.
So I rang Johnny Anea.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And Johnny's one of my close friends, and amazing, deeply good human being. And Tommy always loved Johnny because Johnny just trained at a level that most people can't train at, And anyway, so I rang Johnny and said, listen, mate, I just spoke to Tommy. I reckon he's going to check out. You probably should call him. And he said, oh, shit, okay. So I gave him the number. And about 10 minutes later, Johnny rang me back and he said, oh, mate, I just spoke to Tommy. I said, how was it? He said, I reckon you're right. I reckon he's going to check out. I said, yeah, next couple of days. And he said, but you know what the old bugger said to me? I said, no, what? And he said, well, I talked to him about how he was and all that, and we got through that bit. And then he said to me, anyway, have you been training?
Yeah, exactly. I lost a dear friend earlier this year in Andrew Plimpton. You may remember Andrew.
Yeah, yeah.
He was my predecessor at the Saints and a wonderful contributor to sport and a man of great integrity, and being at his funeral service, John Bertrand gave the eulogy, as did the Wakeland brothers. And I was going around to visit him, and he texted me and he said, mate, not today. I'm just not feeling great. And maybe next week. Well, he passed, I think, on the Sunday. And it was a privilege to get to know Andrew.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
The Admiral. And
well, we're at that age, mate, where we're saying goodbye to people. I went to a funeral just a couple of weeks ago for the great Laurie Agarn.
I don't know Laurie.
So Laurie Agarn was a Yarraville boy, played his VFA footy at Yarraville and loved his footy, good player. And he ended up, when he went into coaching, he went to Reservoir Old Boys in the amateurs. And Reservoir Old Boys, their idea of a fun Saturday afternoon was to run out in the field, punch the shit out of anybody else who was out of there and get a few kicks of the footy. And they were facing being thrown out of the amateurs. So they brought Laurie in and he turned the place around big time. And he took him up the grades, and then he got recruited by Old Scotch and he coached Old Scotch. And he coached me in the VAFA state team. Yeah. And I played under Laurie a few games of state footy and he loved me because I was pretty tough, And I'd take it up to the opposition if it meant getting a bit physical and, biffing a couple of blokes. Well, that was all right. But he used to always message me on Facebook and say, "G'day, Ruckman, how you going?" And I remember there's a very funny story at Marcellin in 1984. After the first round of the second half of the season, we were a game clear on the ladder and we'd just beaten the second top team by 10 goals.
Yeah.
So we're on song. And then we dropped 5 straight. We forgot how to win. And the coach asked Laurie if he'd come down and take us for training. And Laurie, fierce man, and really hard and really tough. And, like, for example, one day when he was coaching Old Scotch, there was a full forward, big full forward at Uni Blues. I won't mention any names. King hit one of the little blokes for Old Scotch and knocked him out during the second quarter.
Shit.
And so at half time, Laurie walked out in the ground, walked up to him and knocked him out. And had to coach from the other side of the fence for the next 4 weeks.
Only 4 weeks.
But that was Laurie's thing.
You made a point.
Don't do that to my boys. This is the line, you just crossed it.
Yes.
But he, anyway, he called us all in after we'd done a warm-up. He said, what's wrong with you college boys? And he used another word, didn't use ball.
Colourful.
And he said, it's pressure. You can't handle pressure and you don't know how to apply it. And of course, his reputation preceded him and all the blokes stand there quaking in their boots, And he said, can anybody here give me a definition of pressure? And of course, nobody was game to answer. And he said, come on, can't any of you blokes give me a definition of pressure? And one bloke up the back, Rick Fraser, who's a very funny man, said, force over area?
That's good.
And Laurie just about burst a spleen in that moment, made us do a 400, and he called us back in and he said, I'm going to give you my definition of pressure. It's extreme effort. And you see, I reckon when you haven't got a good culture inside a football club, you cannot get players to go to that place.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because the players, certain players set an example and the other ones can come along and do their very best to match that example. But if it's not one player, but a group of senior players or even mid-ranking players aren't, setting that standard and demonstrating to others, this is what we stand for, then you're pissing into the breeze.
I remember when I took over my first full job at a footy club at Richmond in 86. I was appointed head of high performance there. I got into the system and all the people used to talk about was, we're going to do it like Hawthorn does it. But nobody could quantify what it was that Hawthorn were doing.
Yeah.
And I look back now and I realise all it was extreme effort, you know?
Yeah.
And but years later I said to Laurie, I reminded him of that time, and I said, "Where did you get that from?" And he said, "An 11-year-old kid told me that."
What?
And I said, "Wow, as a grown man, you took on the advice of an 11-year-old kid." He said, "Why wouldn't you when it's that good?"
Absolutely. Yeah, you bet.
So
You
there's
bet.
yeah, there's so much in it, isn't there? It's like when I was at Richmond at those times, one of the directors of the club, John Robinson, who was owned a couple of Holden dealerships, he was really close mates with Greg Norman.
Oh,
So Greg used to come down and
oh,
watch training.
right.
And so I got to sit there on the fence while training was going on and talk with Greg for a long time.
Amazing.
And even one night we had a couple of beers and just talked, and he was an amazing guy, Greg Norman, like really amazing guy.
Yeah.
And I was talking to, I said to him, and what he knew about conditioning, I mean, I was in awe. Like the
Really?
guy was such a perfectionist because
Yeah.
he applied extreme effort to his golfing career.
Yeah.
I said to him, "How many hours a day do you practice?" And he said, "Minimum 8." I said, "What about if you're playing a tournament?" He goes, "At the end of the round, go to the practice fairways."
Well,
He
it's sort
goes,
of,
"That's a non-negotiable." And then
yeah.
I said to him, one of the catch-ups, I said, "What about," I think he'd lost one of those unlosables, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
or no, it was just a playoff, where he lost it. And he said, I said, "Would you do that differently over again?" And he said, "No, I wouldn't." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, you see, mate, my job out there," he said, "golf is about the fans. It's not about the golfers." He said, "So it's my job to play entertaining golf, and I will
Really?
always play entertaining golf.
Oh, that's
But I
interesting.
will never play safe golf." Look what happened. The guy's a billionaire, like his customer
Oh,
base, like he's just,
and if
you
you
know,
if you're consistent and persistent, fortune will favor the brave.
yeah.
You've got to
But
be consistent and persistent.
he's been criticized a lot, but the guy was so resolute in those points. And I went, wow, can I achieve that level of dedication in my life? I don't know whether I can, but he could. And it was again that he just had it in his character that he was going to always dedicate himself to is entertaining the fans with great golf.
And he didn't listen to the man in the man in the grandstand. He listened to the man in the arena,
Yeah,
and which
so
is one of my
interesting.
favorites.
Yeah, so
You know.
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, mate, it's been like we haven't even talked about business or anything, and and
No.
and that's all fine. It's been such a great chat, and I'm sure we could talk, and maybe we'll do this again because
No.
you've
We could
got a lot
talk.
of richness, and because I think it'd be really cool for us to sit down and talk about addiction at some point
Oh,
too.
mate, it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
It is a fascinating topic. I mean, you've got your major addictions in, alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, but you've also got addictions emerging, social media, shopping, gossip, road rage.
yeah,
And they're
yeah,
all sort of in that, some are heavier duty than others, but it's just where the world's going. A lot of people, I just finished reading a book, one of my favorite authors, and he was saying in his book that about 95% of what we say, do, and think is subconscious. A great too many of us are walking around in subconsciousness. So we're not mindfully aware of what we're saying, what we're doing, what we're thinking, how we're influencing others.
mm,
We're just like bloody dogs on a treadmill,
yeah,
doing life, pissing and moaning. And I'll leave you with this one. A mate of mine said to me once, I blamed somebody else. I pointed the finger at somebody else. And he said, have a look, Rod, there's three coming back at you.
yeah,
What part of that do you own?
yeah,
And
exactly.
that's about, what you're on about. And I love it is, we've just got to learn to take personal responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not his
Well,
fault. It's not her fault. It's not their fault. Own it.
as another friend of mine once said, if you spot it, you got it.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
So, quick question then, that I ask all of my guests.
Yeah.
Who was a man, a woman, like a person that touched you at some point in your life that you looked at and you thought, wow, that's the sort of character that I want to be. That's someone worth emulating.
My father. Oh,
Um,
absolutely. My
Tell me
mother,
about your dad.
my mother and my father.
Yeah,
I was blessed. My father was a saint.
yeah,
I never saw him raise his voice. I never saw him raise his hand. He was always providing service in the community. He raised 10 children. He always walked through the door at 6:05 every night of his life. He was a contributor to the community. He was a man of very few words, but watch what he did. And my mother was a feisty Catholic woman who had 10 children, and she used to write pro-contraception articles. So I can identify. My father was my hero. My mother was my heroine. It was their actions, their behaviours, their advice consistently. And I might have been a bit of a slow learner. And I've been fortunate, John, as you know, like you, to have been involved in sport and business and met some extraordinary human beings. I'm actually building a relationship with a wonderful Australian as we speak for one of our new businesses. He's a former chairman of every, major company on the ASX, and he's a former Australian of the Year and a former Chancellor of Monash University. And I've snagged him as chairman of one of our new businesses, and he is as humble can be.
Wow.
And he's a wonderful teacher.
Well, just I wish you all the very best with that venture. I'm keen to hear more about it.
It's fascinating.
Another thing just piqued my curiosity. Where did you do your schooling?
I was a dropout, mate. I went to Sandy Tech. I went for a exam, like a scholarship at CBC, but I flunked it. So I went to Sandy Tech. It was where I learned to negotiate, because they're a pretty rough lot, and I wasn't much of a fighter. I was more of a lover, so I learned my negotiation skills there, and I dropped out at year 11. And I'm just not it's not how I learn in the classroom.
I think that school is the campus of Sandringham Secondary College now.
Correct.
Where my son finished his last 2 years of school.
Yeah, it was years ago when I went there. It was Sandy Tech. It's now Sandy Secondary College. I learned a great many things about life, every facet of life there, because it was rough and tumble. We backed onto the Housing Commission, and my first girlfriend, my first fist fight, my first negotiation, my first driving lesson, because I pinched a teacher's car. Not pinched it, but just took it for a drive because it teasing it. So but I'm a big fan of Sir Kenneth Robinson, the British academic who wrote the book The Element. And he talks about traditional education systems don't suit everyone. They certainly didn't suit me.
No.
But according to Sir Ken, your job in life is to find your element.
Yeah.
And then blossom in that element. And so, for me, it's sales. I love selling. I'm not ashamed of it. I love selling. I love doing deals. I love building companies. I love going on the journey. And I'm writing a book called Get Over Yourself. We're all salesmen. I don't care who you are. A parent, a doctor, a school teacher, a nurse, a barista. We're all flipping salesmen. You know that, Johnny.
Yeah, I do, mate. I do. Well, Rod, thank you so much, mate. It's been so cool to have you on the podcast. And we'll do this again, because I think a conversation about addiction and educating young people coming through as to how we help them avoid those pitfalls, would be so cool. So
let's do that, John, because that's an important topic.
Awesome, mate. We'll do.
Very grateful, John. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for tuning into this podcast. If you think it's valuable, please share it around, and let's sort of get more people talking about the incredible value of healthy masculinity. And so remember, as I always say, when you're out there in the world, be the adult that you needed when you were a kid and you're either in trouble or you're scared. So thanks a lot. Have a good week.